I'm now joined live from Istanbul in Turkey by Bashar EL-Halabi, who's an energy and geopolitical analyst. Bashar, thank you so much for joining us here today on The Edge. And we're here to discuss what, on the one hand, looks like great news because fuel is being delivered to Lebanon, which is in much need. But on the other hand, there's disconcertment about whether or not it's okay to use this fuel. Can you give us an explanation of what is the situation and what are the problems associated with it?
Absolutely. So in theory, Lebanon, the fact that Lebanon, as government and institutions, if it ever considers importing Iranian crude or any other oil product, then it was definitely subject to U.S. sanctions. However, what Hezbollah tried to do in this recent stunt was to actually import Iranian crude oil, Iranian diesel and gasoline that are much needed definitely in the Lebanese market nowadays. But rather than docking the ship in Lebanese international waters and offloading it in Lebanese-owned tankers, and storage facilities, which could subject whether private firms or the government to sanctions, it opted to offload the tankers in the Banias port in Syria, northern Syria, and then for those diesel and gasoline quantities to be loaded in trucks and to be inserted into the Lebanese territory, as was seen yesterday in the stunt that was pulled for media attention and for the global attention as well. But to highlight things, those trucks were entered through illegal crossings and not the usual Lebanese customs crossings, which could have subjected those state organizations to sanctions. Up until now, there hasn't been an official statement or position by the U.S., whether Treasury or Defense Department or Justice Department, to talk about or to discuss what has happened in Lebanon over the past 24 hours. Although today a new list of sanctions was published, and it targeted Hezbollah members and probably Hezbollah-linked organizations, but it has nothing to do with what happened over the past 24 hours. So in reality, Hezbollah was able to pull this stunt, and the optics of it was what the party needed, desperately needed from one side, but it also managed to in a way, win the narrative, at least regarding the recent shipments that entered the country.
Now, you describe it as a stunt by Hezbollah, and I can understand that obviously Hezbollah hoped to gain political traction with or popularity from the Lebanese people by doing this. But the reality is that the fuel situation in Lebanon is such that hospitals are finding it difficult to power the lighting and the equipment so needed for keeping their patients safe. Could you, for those that don't understand the situation, the fuel crisis in Lebanon, could you just briefly explain that to us?
Absolutely. So Lebanon is the reason why there are fuel shortages in Lebanon is basically divided into two parts. The first part is that the Lebanese government is unable to import fuel that can meet the needs of the market as it used to because of the fact that the country is almost bankrupt and the central bank cannot finance such transactions anymore in the same quantities that it used to. So there's some sort of a rationing by the state in terms of the quantities that are being imported. This is from one side. And of course, the fuel cartel in Lebanon is very complicated, and it's divided according to sectarian loyalties, which is why there's also this tug of war between the fuel cartel and the central bank in terms of the central bank giving the green light for such international transactions. So this is one side. The other side is that also the private entities that distribute fuel in the Lebanese market are also owned by, or at least they're affiliated in a way to the sectarian ruling elite, and they've been hoarding the fuel, the state-subsidized fuel that has been imported into the country. They've been hoarding it and holding it back from selling it on the market because they know, and this happened a few hours ago, they know that the government is going to lift subsidies on the fuel, and they know that they'll be able to score major benefits from the discrepancy in the price that will allow them to sell at a much higher market rate than what they bought the fuel for. So those two reasons are why Lebanon right now has fuel shortages. And that's not what Hezbollah has said, or this is not at least the narrative that Hezbollah has peddled over the past month since the Secretary General of the militant group announced that he will be importing diesel and gasoline from Iran. What Hezbollah said basically is that the country is under siege. They propped up this narrative. They made up this narrative. Although Lebanon is not under siege, we have tankers filled by fuel in the Lebanese international waters, but are unable to offload because of the financial crisis. So Hezbollah talked this thing up. They created a false narrative around the fact that Lebanon is under siege, and what they did by bringing those tankers into Syria and the trucks through Lebanon, they claimed victory by saying that they broke the American or the U.S. siege on Lebanon, which is definitely not correct in a way.
And what's so tragic in this situation, as you say, on the one hand, there's this black market in everything, but especially as we're talking about fuel, in fuel, where people are holding back, waiting for the prices to go up to sell it, and also that there is fuel available, but it can't actually be bought, to be landed in the country. This obviously is a result of a huge mismanagement of the government over the last years. There is a new government now with Prime Minister McCarthy is trying to pull things together. Can he resolve these two issues, the black market and the import of fuel?
I think things are definitely larger than McCarthy and his ability to be able to resolve those challenges anyway. Of course, right now, his government projects some sort of a basic level of confidence, at least by the different sectarian constituencies, because they're all represented in his government, which means he might have a certain green light in order to enact certain reforms and to tap into international donations and assistance in general. But the system in place is it's deeply rooted and is neck deep into corruption, that any reform or any change will definitely affect whether popularity of certain parties or their mere existence in terms of within their constituencies. Because if they are unable to supply or at least give the services that they used to, if they're not able to fund the clientelist networks that they've created over the past decades, then this will definitely affect them and will affect their chances in the upcoming parliamentary elections in May next year. However, going back to Hezbollah, there's a point that needs to be highlighted as well. So Hezbollah has mentioned that the fuel that they imported is going to be delivered to hospitals, to orphanages, and what have you. But if that's the case, and if this fuel is for the entire country, what are the shenanigans for? What is the media and propaganda campaign for? I mean, yesterday, many people were, first of all, annoyed by the situation because they know that obviously the government and the central bank can still import with whatever is left from reserves in the central bank. They can import fuel, but the political bickering in the country was kind of blocking that. In addition to the fact that no Lebanese citizen or no citizen in the world would want to undermine their sovereignty in order for fuel to enter the country while we have tankers in the international waters of the country waiting to offload. So imagine just a militia talking to a neighboring state and agreeing to bring in oil tankers without even this neighboring country discussing this with any senior government official in Lebanon. I mean, this is absurd. And while this was supposed to be a gift to the Lebanese, as Hezbollah framed it, it kind of backfired in a way. And now you also have different people and their or different different people in their respective sects demanding the leaders and their sectarian parties to do the same. Well, if Hezbollah did it for the Shia community, why can't Saad al-Hariri do it for the Sunni community? And why can't Michel Aoun do it for the Christian communities, for example? So this has only also caused further fragmentation in the country, and this definitely serves primarily the interests of Hezbollah, who does not want a unifying and uniting moment similar to the October 2019 uprising. And it also serves the other constituencies of the sectarian power-sharing arrangement in the country, who definitely do not want to see the Lebanese coming together, especially ahead of the elections next year, in order for them not to be able to achieve any sort of change.
Well, there are so many issues coming out of what, on face value, seems to be one thing, but as you so clearly explained, turns out to be something totally different. Let's hope that legitimate support and legitimate supplies can be brought to ease the plight of the Lebanese as soon as possible, as it's desperately needed. Bashar EL-Halabi, thank you so much for joining me here today on The Edge.